Good evening, everybody. Hope everyone's well on this Thursday evening. Just some updates so far, and you'll see it under your announcements on ARC. Number one is finally managed to get a download of your assignment one. So that has been loaded on ARC already. So have a look at that. The second one is your ICE task one, which is due next week, Thursday. I have loaded it on ARC, but it's only going to be visible at 8:30. So once you are done here, you can obviously already start working on that and have it have it due by the 13th of March. It is a soft due date. The reason why I'm saying it is it's there to help you for your assignments and to pace you out throughout the semester. However, there will be a harder due date as we progress. So just be aware of that. Try and stick to the due dates because it only helps you at the end. Okay. So we'll start off today's lecture. If there's any questions so far, just let me know. Everything is up to date in terms of your recordings on YouTube, as well as all of your content that we've covered thus far in the last two sessions. So I think I don't owe you much for now. Once we proceed with the semester, then we'll just keep each other accountable. Okay. So today we're going to do Learning Unit 2, which is, if you look at this Learning Unit through your textbook, it is so overly complicated. It becomes very difficult for you to understand the regional, spatial, and the site level context when we look at, warehousing specifically. It does make it a little bit difficult when you're looking at it from a textbook perspective. So I try and summarize it as much as I can and to bring it to layman's terms the best way that I possibly can in the session. This learning unit specifically, almost 100% of the time ends up in an assignment or ends up in your examination. So read through it from a textbook perspective, make sure you understand it, and then use the notes that we speak about in the lecture to, take it forward if you need to further understand. Okay. So the first one that we're going to go through is what we call regional spatial context, okay? And what is regional spatial context, if we need to understand it from that perspective? It basically involves understanding your location, the distribution, and the relationship of where your warehousing specifically needs to be within a geographic region. And this is how you look at it from an analysis perspective. So number one is a location analysis. So you need to evaluate the geographic distribution of warehouses within a region. You need to identify sort of key locations where warehouses are clustered, such as, is it in an industrial park? Is it in a transportation hub? Is it in a airport hub, for instance, or is it in a corridor? Like, is it in a strategic logistics corridor, strategic port corridor? So you need to access the proximity of the warehouses, especially if it's situated near a major highway or a port or an airport, or even railroad, if it worked. So as well as what is the proximity to urban centers or population centers where your customers are basically situated. So that's one of the analysis that forms part of regional spatial context. The second one is accessibility and connectivity. So you need to analyze where it is most accessible and where you can have connectivity of your warehouses to either transportation networks or different infrastructures, okay? So you need to evaluate whether it is close to your airports, highways, ports, etc., as well as the quality and the capacity of transportation infrastructure in that specific region. So if the product that you're moving is viable to be moved on, let's say, heavy-duty trucks, is it accessible? Is it an inaccessible area where a transporter can collect it from a warehouse and then distribute it into smaller DCs or to an end customer if it is going to a retailer, for instance? So you need to assess the impact of Is there a transportation constraint? Is there major congestion? Is there specific bottlenecks, on that warehouse operation, and, to give you an inefficiency, or you need to look for a logistic efficiency at the end of the day. An example for this, I'm not sure if anyone is quite known to like the Durban area, but the situation happening around the port specifically, and the area is called Bayhead. If you have a warehouse that's close proximity to Bayhead, for instance, it's basically down the road from the port, so you can easily access your stock, when it is from a port perspective, and you can put it into a warehouse facility there. However, there's major congestion that happens around the area. So getting in and out of your own facility can be a major delay and can cause for some inefficiency. So you need to basically analyze the case and understand what the pros and cons of putting it into an inaccessible area, if that's going to work out for you or not. Okay, the next one is market demand. Okay, so you need to consider the proximity of your warehouse to your target market. Where is your customer situated? Where is their distribution center situated? So that needs to be one of your, customer proximity questions. You need to understand what is the market demand patterns from your customer. Where is your demographic sitting? And, which is your major consumption areas, if I can say that. So you can identify where is your optimal warehouse location, so you can minimize as much transportation cost as possible. You need to be able to find a way to reduce your lead times so that you can have greater service levels. So you need to assess the trade-off between having something centralized versus having something that's decentralized, based on where your customer's proximity and where your market demand is basically sitting. The next one is your land use and zoning regulation. So you need to evaluate your land use regulation and your zoning restrictions. Any sort of like environmental regulations that may impact your warehouse development and your location decisions. You need to consider factors such as what land is available, what is the cost of it, what is the different classifications, can you warehouse there or can't you warehouse there, and any sort of environmental consideration when you are selecting that specific warehouse space or that site. You need to also know from a compatibility side whether that warehouse, there's a lot of legislation and legalities when you're looking at it from a land use and a zoning side. So those are the sort of questions you need to ask yourself, whether it's going to minimize any sort of potential conflicts, and need to be able to mitigate as much environmental impact as possible. And the last one, the next one is supply chain network design. So you need to analyze the role of your warehouse within a broader scope of your supply chain network. So, and within your supply chain network comes your distribution network. So you need to consider some factors like, how is your inventory being positioned in your warehouse? What is the network optimization so that you can reduce as much of your cost from a transport side as possible? So you need to understand where your strategic placement of your warehouse is going to be, so you can support something that's very omni-channel. And you can do a lot, because in terms of business now, a lot of businesses are shifting more towards your e-commerce fulfillment. So you need to understand where you're situated now is going to contribute towards you having e-commerce fulfillment, because a lot of times it uses maybe a multimodal transportation. So that also needs to come into effect of how your supply chain is designed. That's how you are going to factor in where you're going to sit at in terms of a regional space. Competitive landscape. So you need to identify from a competition perspective within the region's warehousing industry, who's the key competitors, who's the different market players, who's going to be able to supply you from a logistics perspective within your region. So you need to know what is their market share, how does their pricing works, what's the different value add service offerings they can give to you, so you can understand the competitive positioning of the different warehouses and where you sit if you have to make a decision of that's where your warehouse is going to be. And then the last one is economic trends. Okay, so you need to consider different economic and demographic trends that may influence any decision when it comes to warehouse location. You need to evaluate factors like what is the population growth, your employment trend, how much money is your customer actually spending in that specific geographic or demographic. And then you need to basically cluster them into different areas to situate where your regional warehouse is going to be. So you need to assess the impact of all of these economic cycles so that you can understand whether your warehouse occupancy is going to be well suited or not well suited. So basically, when you conduct a very comprehensive overview and outlook of your regional spatial context for warehousing, a lot of businesses makes a lot of their decisions based on where their warehouse is located, what is the distribution network from there, what is the best way to optimize their supply chain so they can have a lot more efficiency in their business, they can reduce all of their costs and also be as competitive as possible, because one of the key things is faster to market. I was actually watching a video on TikTok the other day, and it was a new retailer that came on board, and it's part of the Pepco group. And people were just commenting about how they placed an order at 10 o'clock at night and it was delivered the next morning. Even if they have a smaller range of products and they have lower SKUs than what an Ackermans or a Pep or an Edgar's can provide, people have just been blown away by their service offerings. And that's probably based on the fact that they either have a good space in terms of warehousing where they can get faster to market to their customers, or they have just partnered with the correct service provider logistically that can get their product there, the next day. So whatever that reasoning has become, it allows for customers to make a decision very quickly that, yes, I'm going to use these people and I will be using them in the future, because if I have an event, I can place an order today and my stuff's delivered tomorrow and I can go for my event on the weekend. So it's those sort of things actually makes a huge difference, and it impacts the customer, and it gives them satisfaction where they want to come back to you at the end of the day and keep buying. Okay. If there's any questions, guys, just unmute yourself and you can ask the questions, and then we can take it from there. All right, so then we're going to move on to the value chain when we look at it from a Southern Africa perspective. And I think what I basically wanted to show you here, and it's not necessarily in your textbook per se, but it's different industries or different markets that are in the Southern African landscape, and how their processes form part of their decision when it comes to regional spatial context and warehousing in that degree. So the first one that we want to look at is, agriculture, and you want to understand it in terms of how it best shapes the value chain in a specific region. So from an agriculture perspective, so from a Southern Africa side, we do have a significant agricultural sector. I mean, the biggest focus is on crops like maize and wheat and sugarcane, those sort of things, and livestock. So the agricultural value chain in the region includes activities like, your farming, processing, packaging, distribution, etc. So a lot of times they face challenges related to access to markets, because how do they now get their product to a specific location? So, this is part of the value chain and the questions that they're now asking within the agricultural sector. When we look at it from a mining perspective, We do know that, especially in our country, we are rich in mineral resources, like, your gold, diamonds, platinums, those sort of things, coppers. So the mining value chain basically has a lot of exploration. You look at extraction, refining, that sort of thing. So the mining sector is a significant contributor to our economy specifically, but there's a lot of challenges that they also face when it comes to regulations, some of that frameworks that's provided within the country. How can they best be sustainable in the business, or in the industry itself? And also corporate social responsibility. They want to do as much as they can when it comes to social well-being. Then we look at it from a manufacturing side. So the manufacturing sector in South Africa, different industries as well, automotive, textile, chemicals, even food processing being one of it. So the value chain here, it involves a lot of your productions, assembling, quality control, and distribution. So you can see what a big role distribution actually falls into a supply chain specifically. And they want to be able to create, industrialization, have, better raw materials available to them so they can create, or reduce some of the dependency on imports and be a proudly sort of Southern African product, a South African product. Trade and logistics. Also, Southern Africa itself, and I don't know if a lot of you are aware of it, but we are basically a gateway for trade for a lot of other continents, like the rest of Africa, European markets, Asian markets, even in America. And the logistics sort of value chain in the region, it's everything. It's transport, warehousing, customs, freight forwarding, and you need efficiency, you need reliability when it comes to infrastructure itself. I had the benefit of having to go to Vietnam last year and understand some of the transport and logistics, and even from a manufacturing perspective, to view various businesses. And one of a big thing, so we had a session with the trade and commerce, part of the government sector, a session. And to hear that South Africa is one of the most beneficial trade lanes is amazing, which means that us in South Africa are contributing a lot to their import and export trade. We import a lot from when it comes to textiles and fabrics and even products. If a lot of you didn't know that Nike is basically produced in Vietnam. And not a lot of people know that, but you can find, it for next to nothing in Vietnam. So it's these sort of things that you wouldn't necessarily understand it until you're physically in the country and they're telling you that this is the information that we have. This is the most developed trade lane. And, it's a big contributor to our economy at the end of the day. So trade and logistics is a huge factor when we're looking at the value chain in South Africa, especially. Tourism and hospitality. So we know, obviously, we are renowned for our cultural heritage and tourist attractions. So looking at it from a hospitality side, hotels, transports, accommodation, touring, those sort of things play a very big role in economic development for the country, job creation, even foreign investments. It does contribute towards the entirety of the value chain. Energy and infrastructure. So obviously we face a lot of challenges when it comes to energy access, having reliability to that energy, and sustainability. So when it comes to electricity and renewable energy sources, we need a lot of investments, and we need a lot. We need to be able to address challenges like energy poverty, and we need to be able to promote better economic growth, but we can't do that if we have load shedding 3 times a day, So these are sort of, functions that fall within the value chain of South Africa or Southern Africa itself. ICT, so information technology itself, also communication plays a big role here. How do we best drive innovation, connectivity, and anything economic development within, Southern African network, whether it's telecommunications, software development, or even e-commerce. E-commerce, a big driving factor there is information technology. Everyone wants something that's seamless. We want something at the click of a button. We can order something online and then, it takes a day or two to have it delivered. And then the last one is social and environmental sustainability. So we have a lot of challenges. We know social inequality, unemployment, poverty, those sort of things. From a value chain perspective, we need to be promoting very inclusive growth, social development, and any sort of sustainability from an environmental perspective. But there's a lot of strategies that businesses can adopt, like green energy, green manufacturing, green logistics, or even having good corporate social responsibility goals. And I think that falls short with a lot of organizations now, is that they don't look at doing a CSR campaign once a quarter or once, every 6 months. So basically, by analyzing the value chain, especially in Southern Africa itself, we can identify, and stakeholders and businesses can identify opportunities, whether it's innovation opportunities or just collaboration, where we can drive economic growth, we can drive employment, competition as well, and we can promote as much sustainability as possible. Okay. So I want to touch on a little bit when it comes to the regional dimensions, especially when we're looking at it from a different country perspective. And I put some of the countries or the continents here, okay? So when we look, and I think the explanation of just this is just to give you an idea of where we sit from an Africa perspective as compared to the rest of the different continents. And if we have to look at North America specifically, a lot of the warehousing when it comes to North America tend to be very larger in size, and also very upscaled compared to a lot of the other regions, because they have a lot more land availability, and they have a big demand for having large-scale distribution centers. So many of the warehouses there are located in either suburban or rural areas near major transportation hubs, and also major logistics corridors, whether it's an airport or a seaport. It allows for efficient access to different transportation networks and also multimodal transportation network. So the trend, especially from a North America perspective, is e-commerce and having an omni-channel retail specifically, because they've had a lot of increase for modern, more advanced warehousing that's equipped with automation and robotics to improve efficiency, and they can be able to fulfill customers' orders on time. So I'll share a little story with you, because I know we touched on technology and advanced warehousing. So specifically, I mean, I've been to various customers from various different industries to have a view of their warehousing situation and, comparing it to the industry that I'm in. And you have big businesses in South Africa where you and I buy from that are run completely manual when it comes to warehousing. So when I say manual, it's like if they have, let's say it's in the clothing industry or the retail industry, and they have, different, they're selling T-shirts and pants and sneakers, etc. Every single size of every single color is considered a different SKU. And basically you walk into warehouses and all they have is boxes and boxes and boxes of stock that's lying there with no automation whatsoever. So when a customer like me and you have to place an order on their website, or if a retailer has to place an order with them, they are now scrambling for to put together an order, because there's no control over the inventory that they have in their specific warehouse. So it takes them sometimes 2 to 3 days to basically put together one order, which shouldn't be the case. Whereas if you have to flip it to a organization or even a logistics service provider that has complete full automation in their warehousing space, every single SKU. So I'll give you an example. If you are wearing a black T-shirt, okay, you have different sizes. So extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, double XL. Okay. Let's say that's 6 different sizes, for instance. That's 6 different SKUs. Each SKU needs to be in a designated bin with a specific barcode that's attached to it. So when you place an order with a customer, or a customer places an order with you, you're able to see, okay, I've got 2 stock or 2 items left in stock of a medium black shirt. And you are able to then pull it out from your stock. You scan your barcode and you put it into your shipping history, your manifest for shipping. So that's the difference between the two, having automation and not having automation. You can have a very efficient business with limited resources available when you have automation. The moment you don't have automation, unfortunately, you now need at least 20 laborers to do one order, because you're now pulling from where you can dream the product is basically sitting. Okay. Then let's move on to Europe. Okay. So you can understand with Europe being quite a developed nation, warehouses vary in size, and it's also based on, what's available in terms of the land, whether there's regulatory requirements, etc. So in an urban area, for instance, is sort of densely populated, your warehouses tend to be very small in size, and it's sort of integrated to optimize the land use, and you want to try and minimize your environmental impact because you are sitting in sort of more of an urbanized area. So there's a growing trend towards multi-story warehouses to meet the demand for last mile delivery and e-commerce. So I hope you can see the trend here, that the trend is going into more an omni-channel and in e-commerce fulfillment in a lot of the more developed countries, because people don't like to go and shop in a store anymore. So there's a lot from a sustainability perspective, how they can be more efficient when it comes to energy, and, try and do a warehouse design and operations in a European country that is quite fulfilled in terms of having the advancement of automation again. Okay. Asia, so if we have to look at Asia, basically they have a wide diversity when it comes to size, the scale, and the functionality, based on them having their regions quite vast in terms of geographic and economic diversity. So in countries like, for instance, like China and India, where your land is more abundant, warehouses tend to be a lot larger in scale, so that it's accommodating a growing demand, especially in those sort of countries. It's more a manufacturing and a distribution sort of service. And then in densely populated areas, like more urban areas, the trend is going more towards your vertical integration. So you're having multi-story or multi-level warehousing, where you're optimizing as much land use as possible. So you're addressing some of your space constraints, where you're going more vertically as opposed to horizontally. Also tech and innovation, automation, that sort of thing are also driving improvements when we look at efficiency with warehousing in an Asia perspective. Then we got Latin America. Okay, so warehouses in Latin America basically vary in sizes and quality. It's depending on the factors such as, the economic development, what is the infrastructure, what is the market demand in that specific, areas. Where you have more of a robust economy and different infrastructures logistically, your warehouses are a lot more modern, a lot more well-equipped, more automated, and also strategically located near a major transport route or a port, etc. In a less developed region, where you have sort of inadequate transport or inadequate infrastructure, you have a lot more smaller scale warehousing. You have less technology advancements, and then you have some challenges when it comes to logistics and supply chain, etc. So it's sort of like neither here nor there when we speak on sort of Latin America. Then we come to Africa. So warehouses in Africa, we have very unique challenges when it comes to infrastructure, security, and even market demand. So in your major cities, so your more urbanized areas, your warehouses are a little bit smaller, And this is also due to land constraints and also limited investment in logistics. You don't have that much, riding on those sort of areas. However, in regions where it's a growing economy, where there's a lot of trade going on, there's an increasing demand for more of your modern warehousing and your modern equipments and your advancements in technology. So you can support a lot on the manufacturing and the distribution side and that sort of industry. Okay, so that basically just sums up when we're looking at it from a dimension perspective and a different country. So just to give you a different perspective of where, when you're looking at it on an omni-channel and e-commerce perspective, you'll see that the fulfillment's a lot more automated. But if you're looking at more from a distribution and a manufacturing perspective, and especially regions where there's a lot more challenges, you tend to see that there isn't that much of development where they're looking at more multi-story as opposed to a horizontal landscape of warehousing. And remember, when you look at it from a multi-story perspective, you have to look at it from a racking side. Can you rack? What's the highest you can rack? If you can't rack, then you need to go through different ISO. And I'm speaking from a South Africa perspective. There's different ISO accreditations. We need to have sprinklers in racks and not just roofing. So there's different scenarios that you need to take into play when we're looking at warehousing. Okay. Then we go on to urban spatial context, okay? So urban spatial context basically is the location and distribution of warehouse facilities within an urban area. Okay, so regional, urban, okay? Just look at the keywords from that perspective. So warehouses basically here, they play a very important role when we look at it from an urban logistics and a supply chain perspective, because they serve a lot from a storage and distribution hubs for a lot of products for businesses that move through the supply chain. So number one is where a location. So your warehouses are typically located in close proximity to transport routes, like your highways, ports, all of that, because they want to be able to facilitate efficient movements of goods in and out of the city itself. So it may be strategically situated either in manufacturing centers or commercial places or industrial zones. These basically serve as distribution centers for businesses opening within an urban sort of area. Okay. Land use and zoning. So the location within an urban area specifically is influenced by a lot of the regulations when it comes to land use and zoning. Also, a lot has to do with like your planning policies of our country, from an urban perspective. So your local government, our government, may basically only designate a specific area for industrial use or for commercial use, or they may impose a little bit of restrictions on the type or the size of the warehouse that's allowed within a specific urban area. So if you are putting a warehouse into an urban area, you need to be able to comply with that zoning regulation. Where the zoning regulation is, what's the building height, what is the size of the property, the maximum size that you can get, what is your parking requirements. Maybe you can only park 50 vehicles there. You can maybe bring only like a 14 or a 15 meter truck in. You need to look at all of those because there would sometimes be some sort of regulation that's involved with an urban warehousing. Then we need to look at warehouse design. And basically, especially warehouses in urban areas, they are quite more compact and the design is a lot more efficient because they need to make use of a small or limited amount of land use or zoning regulation that was given to you. So you need to maximize your storage capacity within a very limited space. So it may be either a multi-story building or it may be something that has a layout that's a little bit higher in density. So you can accommodate for more of a vertical storage. So you can minimize, the facility footprint. So your modern urban warehouses, A lot of it is equipped with some sort of advanced technology, whether it's, an ERP system, for instance, or a MPS system. Something that is where you can retrieve information and you can have automation as quickly as possible. Not a lot of businesses have gone into the robotics. A lot of businesses have gone into the conveyor system, though, where they can improve efficiency and productivity, how they can handle goods. Remember, a lot of times when you do put in automation like a conveyor system, it tends to take up a lot of space. So you're left with very little storage space because you're looking at it more from a conveyor perspective. Okay, then we have last mile delivery and your e-commerce fulfillment. So your urban warehouses, they play quite a critical role when it comes to them facilitating your last mile delivery and even e-commerce when it comes to urban areas. So they basically are quite strategic in the supply chain network because you want to have fast and efficient delivery of products or goods to your customers. So they are situated strategically near either residential areas or commercial centers so that they can minimize delivery time as much as possible. And also your transportation costs is reduced. Besides, if you're moving stuff from a regional area to an urban area, it is more expensive than from an urban area to an urban area. And also your customers getting it on time, so you're getting better customer satisfaction at the end of the day. Transportation and access. So it's basically access to different transportation networks and basically the infrastructure for these sort of warehouses to function correctly. So they need obviously convenient accesses either to public roads or to highways, just so they can facilitate the movement. And especially the movement of their vehicles in and out of the facility itself. And then we have environmental consideration. So urban areas must comply with environmental regulations, or urban warehouses specifically. And there needs to be a lot more sustainability so that they can mitigate the impact to the surrounding environment, of where they're based. So whether it means them doing green building practices or energy efficient practices, or any sort of sustainability, like maybe it's solar power, solar paneling, rainwater harvesting, anything that can minimize energy consumption, reduce emissions as much as possible, and also promote environmental friendly products, or environmental friendly supply chain at the end of the day. And then the last one is integration with urban fabric. So urban warehouses are basically integrated into the fabric of the city. So they must be able to coexist with other land uses and other urban activities. They most times are surrounded by residential neighborhoods, basically with the man on the street. There's a lot of recreational amenities around them, so they need to be able to contribute to the economic development and job creation for the local community. So that's where the integration with the urban community or the urban fabric actually exists. So I think overall, from an urban spatial context itself, it basically involves balancing the need for having an efficient logistic space or warehousing space with the requirements of urbanization. So urban planning, whether it's environmental sustainability, community development, community engagement. So as an organization itself, there needs to be very careful planning when it comes to designing a warehouse facility within an urban area. So you need to look at ways of how best you can optimize your supply chain performance, enhance the urban living of your business in an urban area, and be sustainable when you do that. Okay, so that's urban spatial. So I think try to simplify regional, try to simplify urban, and then we have urban structure, which is the explaining urban structure. So I'm going to run through that because we don't have a lot of time, and I still have site level context when it comes to warehousing to go through. just so that you know the three key items. So if there's anything you can take away from today, it's regional spatial context, what it is and what contributes towards it, urban spatial context, and then site level spatial context. Those are the three things I at least want you to take out of today. So when we look at urban structures itself, okay, we want to look, and there will be some repetition as I go along, but number one is sort of from a land use perspective. You know, urban areas are characterized differently compared to regional areas. It's more residential, it's more commercial. So the land use patterns within the city, etc., is very different when you compare it to regional. It's normally they have a CBD, okay, so a central business district in an urban area, and it's basically like the core of the city, both from an economic perspective as well as a commercial perspective. Normally, has high density when it comes to land uses, tall buildings, a lot of commercial activity, retail shops, that sort of thing. So these are some of the urban structures that come into play. Residential areas, so we know these are like people's homes, your neighborhoods, your housing developments, apartments, those sort of things. And then you have industrial zones that form part of the urban structure. And your industrial zones are basically like designated areas where manufacturing or industrial activities are where the core activities take place. So the industrial zones may be like factories or distribution centers or different logistics facilities that support manufacturing, support production, and they often are closer to like your major transportation routes, like your airports and your ports. And then the last one that we have here is commercial corridor. And basically this is like a land strip, okay, let's just look at it like a land strip, if that's the best way I can explain it, along sort of the major transportation route, whether it's a highway or a public transport route or a public transport line, where this commercial activities are concentrated. So it's a mix of like retail stores, restaurants, entertainments, those sort of things. So it's like a Stanton, for instance. Okay, so that's basically what is considered to be a commercial corridor, and there's a lot from an urbanization that happens in commercial corridors as well. Okay, so I know I spoke a lot about land use versus zoning, and I should have brought the slide up right to the top, so at least you knew what I was talking about when I spoke about land use and zoning. And I think just to give you a bit of a definition of what it is, okay? So when we talk about land use, okay, we're talking about sort of the activities or the purposes for which a land is utilized, okay, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, recreational, all of that. And it defines how different pockets of land are occupied, how it should be developed, and how it should be used within a specific area. So a lot of times the government will tell you how it needs to be used, okay? When we talk about zoning, okay, so this is more of a regulation or a legislation that's used by your government to basically regulate that land use within a specific geographic. So they divide the land into zoning areas so they can establish different regulations, whether it's land uses or building heights or lot sizes, and they basically lay out the legal framework on how best to enforce like zoning permits or building codes or anything that has to do with enforcing a mechanism to ensure some sort of compliance. That's what zoning is basically used for. So a lot of times when we look at zoning, it's done by from a government perspective. So let's say you're part of a local, entity like an eThekwini board or, Ekululeni or whatever it is. They have local planning departments, and that local planning department has like zoning boards. And then they then review your site plan. They'll give you an approval on that. They'll look at different sort of permits, in terms of the regulations. Okay, then we move on to our site level context. Okay, So when we're looking at things from a site level context perspective, it basically involves analyzing specific characteristics and challenges that's associated with when you're selecting and designing a specific warehouse. All right, like for instance, if we have to look at let's look at a location perspective, so proximity to a market. So the site selection process basically begins with identify where you need to be situated. So the potential locations based on how close it is to your market demand, so your proximity to your market demand. Where are your transport networks? What is the labor supply in that specific area? How does the business ecosystem work? So analyzing different demographic data, different competition that's in the market can basically help to understand, what is the most optimal location that balances your accessibility or cost effectiveness so that you are strategically located in the right place. Okay. Then we have access to different transportation networks. So with site level, they basically includes assessing the accessibility of the actual warehouse site that you've chosen to different transport networks. So whether it's closer to like ports, airports, highways, railroads, etc. So easy access to sort of transportation facilities from an inbound and an outbound perspective basically helps because it reduces your costs, it makes you a lot more efficient. So this forms part of how you can basically analyze the specific characteristics when you are look at it from a site level perspective. Okay. Then from a land availability of land side and from a cost side, we need to look at what specific land area is there to accommodate the facility that you require to warehouse. Is there enough loading docks? Do you have enough areas to park? What are the operational requirements that you have? So your site level considers a lot when it comes to evaluating the availability of the land, what's the size, what configuration you need so that you have enough space from an ops perspective, what is the potential for expansion. So let's say 5 years down the line, you now decide, geez, my business is doing so well, I need to expand. Do you have the capability to do that or not? And also, different zoning regulations as well comes into play when we talk about that. So when we look at zoning and land use again, it's site level basically includes anything from a compliancy, zoning ordinance, any sort of regulations from a land use, building codes, permits, governing commercial development, etc. What's your height restrictions, your parking restrictions, your site layout, your building design, so everything that forms part of your zoning decision. Site level ask that question basically. Then we look at infrastructure and your utilities. So a lot of warehouses basically, you need access to infrastructures and utilities like water, electricity, sewage, gas, those sort of things, and even telecommunications, like you need access to telecommunication poles as well. So when you look at it from a site level perspective, they include assessing the availability of all of these things. What is the capacity of the current infrastructure that's there, either from water, electricity, or telecoms? Can it now withstand the size of the warehouse that you are looking at getting and putting into play? What is the reliability of that utility service that you have there? Maybe you need to look at other options, like maybe an option of getting off the grid because you're not able to be supported by the current infrastructure for electricity. So you need to understand what the operational requirements are, and you need to marry that up with the infrastructure and the utilities that is available in that particular site. Okay. Then we have environmental factors. So when we look at it from a site level perspective, you need to understand what is the different features of the site, like drainage or soil or any sort of environmental consideration that may impact whether that warehouse is suitable for your organization or not. Is it a high flood risk or location? Does it have stability when it comes to soil? Let's say you are now manufacturing or you are building a warehouse on a particular land that was given to you, or part of the land use or the zoning requirement. From that particular site context, you need to understand whether the soil has the capability for you to build on. So this is where you look at it from this context. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of environmental regulations and factors that influence whether you select that site or not, and different decisions that is going to sort of minimize the environmental impact that it can have, the environment on its in totality. And then we have future growth or future expansion. So from a site level perspective, it basically is planning for future expansion. How can you best reconfigure your warehouse or your current site for any future development? How can you adapt your facility to accommodate for growth, maybe a change in the market demand or a market condition? Maybe it came to a place like, I was watching videos with this new cyclone Alfred in Australia. And people were buying toilet paper like next level, okay, which is what a lot of people do when they go into a potential lockdown. So then toilet papers are now flying off the shelf. This is something that's changing in market condition, and it now affects the sale of a specific product. So can you have the expansion capacity to actually withstand that? Do you have enough flexibility in your site to change your layout and your infrastructure so you can scale your business either up or down? Which best way you can adapt to the changing needs of your customer. If your customer, pushes for more of a demand of a product in the first 3 months, and then in the next 3 months, it's now a decline in your product growth. Is your business or your warehouse space able to scale according to what your patterns are in terms of demand? Okay, and I think that basically brings us to the end of regional, spatial, and site level context. And I hope that gave you a little bit of an indication of what these three are. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, this is a very important topic. It appears almost 100% of the time in an assessment. So get in tune with it, understand what the three are, so that when you ask in a case study, where does this belong to in terms of, a special context, you're able to say it's regional and this is the regional one, the reason why it's regional, or it's urban and this is the reason why it's urban. And from a site level perspective, this is what we do when we already understand whether we're going urban or regional. And this is how we look at it from a site perspective. Is there any questions for me? I know I rushed through it a little bit, but I want to try to get through as much as I possibly could, because it is quite an important learning unit for you guys. I take it there's no questions. I will have the slides uploaded on ARC right now. I am going to, your ICE task is going to be released at 8:30, so keep an eye for that. And then the recording by tomorrow should be uploaded on YouTube. If that's it and there's no questions, you guys have a fantastic Thursday and a lovely weekend, and I will chat to you next week. Please reach out to me if you have any questions regarding the ICE task. I did try and keep it a little bit more creative for you guys to get you thinking a little bit, but if you're stuck in any way, please just reach out to me. Okay, thank you guys.